Here we are again at the Tech Factor by Purple Quarter, the podcast that's from our end. And today we have Rohit in the house. Thank you so much for making the journey. I know you had to really spend almost an hour and a half in traffic, but thank you so much for coming over to our office, Rohit.
My pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So, just so the audiences know about Rohit, so I know you did your BTech CS and, of course, your MSCS as well, and then started as a member of technical staff, and then moved on to doing multiple other roles in companies. And you did a startup stint as well in 2006, if I'm correct, in the US for two odd years or 3 odd years, and then moved back on to Yahoo, Intuit, and then Walmart, now Wayfair, right? I hope I got the order right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Rohit, tell me a little bit about, because these are not just shift in companies, but you took a risk in 2006 with a startup, and then you also moved different kinds of domains. So, how's it been for you? Could you talk about your journey a bit, please?
Sure. I think my perspective, I think domains are a little overrated.
Okay.
Right? Good techie is a good techie is a good techie, right? They tend to adapt to different domains very, very quickly. And I'll give you an example. When I was joining Yahoo, right after my startup, I was joining Yahoo and I got a job there. And my manager there, who was also the center head, he said, come in and you'll run advertising. And I had I called him frantically before this thing. I want to have one last conversation with you.
Sure.
I said, are you really sure what you're doing? I know I cracked the interview, but you really want to hire me for advertising? I don't know ABC of advertising. And his response always stuck with me. And his response was, the reason why I'm getting you is because you haven't done advertising before.
Wow.
Because I want somebody to look at it from an external perspective and transform it. And I came from a telecom background and everything else. And he said, we've done our homework, you come in. And I ran advertising at Yahoo for 5 years, learned it from scratch. And I believe that because I was not from that field, it helped me contribute a little bit to that space.
Right.
So I personally feel that sometimes when you're not from the domain, you can look at it from a very different perspective and then actually contribute and enhance that domain in some sense. If you're only in the domain, you continue to keep doing the same thing. Having said that, domain has its space as well. If you're in a leadership position where you're doing strategic discussions and decisions, having domain experience is very important. If you're a product manager and you're running a certain aspect of it, sometimes domain can be important. So I don't think domain is absolutely not important. It is, but it's, I think, a little overrated.
Sure.
On the company's part of it that you talked about, I'm a little bit of a startup-ish transformation kind of a person,
Okay.
right? Somebody once told me, and a good friend, and it stuck with me, he said, never join a company which is doing really well because you'll transform it and ruin it, right? So always go to places where there are problems because that's what I love doing. So the way I look at it is that if I'm in a startup, it's a startup. If I'm in a large company, I try to run a startup within a large company.
Okay.
Right? And from places like Bell Labs, which was, best research institute in its life, to startups that I ran, teeny-weeny companies of, 10, 20 people, to something like a Fortune 1 company that I worked for, it didn't make much difference to me personally because I believe that I was able to bring that same startup culture to each of these areas. And that's what keeps me excited about whichever organization that I'm part of.
Great.
So that helped me navigate this path in my career in some form or fashion.
So tell us about the technology, right? So I'm sure that you worked in these companies like it was a startup, but how about adoption towards technology? Because startup, if you see naturally, is more dynamic towards adopting to anything that's new. Larger the company, it becomes a little more tougher. So wanted to hear your views. How did it really work out for you?
So if you look at it, right, that in a startup, it's very important because you're starting something from scratch. You'll probably go with the latest tech and figure out what you're trying to do. How do you actually move things forward?
Right.
So people tend to believe that they're using much more latest tech in terms of what they're trying to do. But then when you're in a larger company, say a large multinational that has billions of dollars in revenue, the scalability of what you're doing becomes very important.
Correct.
And a great engineer is somebody who can merge the two, who can not just use technology, but also figure out how to scale it. Because I have seen a lot of startups where people come in, use really fantastic tech, but just don't know how to scale.
Sure.
So as a result of which they go very well, and then the moment the D-Day comes, they tend to falter, right? The startups that really transform are the ones who actually are able to get through that hump and build something really scalable. On the other side, what happens in large companies is people tend to, stick around with old tech just because it was working. And they don't have the energy in them to go back and say, oh, let me transform it, right? If you can merge the two, that's the best space that you will be in. Again, an example from one of the companies that I've worked for, a large retailer. We were building stuff that was a large workflow system, and I hired this awesome engineer, architect who came in and fundamentally transformed and rewrote that entire system.
Okay.
Which was, probably 600 people in that organization, rewrote it in a period of a year and a half to build one of the most scalable systems that eventually served tens of billions of dollars in revenue. Right? That is the merge of a startup aspect and a large company that you can bring together and you can create magic.
Yeah, taking a cue from what you just said, right? And this is for all the engineers who just listened to what you said. How do you merge the two almost every time? That is, figure out the latest technology that's working and also solve for scale. If I was an engineer, how do I do both?
If you look at it, going back to the fundamental principles of computer science, if you focused on that, you'll realize that that teaches both aspects of it.
Sure.
You cannot use technology if you don't know how to scale it. Most likely, you're doing it in the wrong way.
Okay.
You're retrofitting. You're probably picking a technology that is not suited for the right thing. It's amazing that people used to say this, and this is a very interesting anecdote. It goes way back to Bell Labs days. People believe that C++ was invented for job security. And why? Because in C++ you can write code, and a lot of people don't do C today. It was written in a way in which it is impossible to read code. So you can never fire the person who wrote the code. Right?
Okay.
And switches were written in C++ in those days because that language was invented in Bell Labs.
Sure.
So essentially, if you take that tech and use it for the wrong purpose, you are neither serving the tech nor the scale. So if you're able to make sure that you use the technology for the purpose for which it was built, it's not actually a dichotomy to have two different things. It's the same thing. Because if you use the right tech for the right solution, it'll always scale.
Wow.
It's a choice.
Wow. Interesting point. I'll keep that in mind the next time someone asks me about it. So, Rohit, now, we've talked about your flashback. Let's talk about your current role that you're playing, and you're actually taking care of a retail domain. And let's talk about the technology that we can see at Wayfair. What are you looking at building? What can we, as people from the outside, expect?
So Wayfair essentially isn't retail, but our core is the home. Right? So what we say is we let you build beautiful homes. Now, all retail is not made equal, and some of our able competitors may believe that you can have the smallest parcel delivered in the same way a sofa is delivered.
Sure.
We don't believe that. We believe that in order for you to excel yourself in a space in which you are building beautiful homes and you're selling furniture and you're selling home stuff, you have to have very special mechanisms, not just from a customer experience, all the way from customer experience to supply chain to delivery.
Okay.
Right? And we basically bring all of this together in a very unique way in which we can do online home furnishing for the customer so they have the best experience at picking the furniture or picking the home goods, to the mechanism of our ability to have a very effective large parcel and small person supply chain system for us to be able to deliver it, and finally have a mechanism to serve our customers in the best possible way. Now, a person who sells you a book can also claim that they can do that. We believe we can do it better than most because we are able to bring it all together. And that's really the beauty of building what we build at Wayfair.
So are you saying that you guys are also using a lot of AR? Because if you're saying that if I can from online, if I can pick furniture, because for furniture you also need to know if it'll fit your space, right? And if it's about furnishing the wallpaper, then I would like to know if it'll suit my, let's say, the flooring, right? So how does that work? I'm just deeply curious. How does that work from a technology standpoint?
So if you look at the way tech has evolved on the customer side, it's amazing, right? Retail was built in a mechanism, or online retail was built in a mechanism to say, oh, this is the experience you get in a physical store. How can we actually replicate it in an online world?
Got it.
What I think we are trying to say is that, yes, we do that, but at the same time, we believe what we can give you in the online world is maybe even superior to what you can do in a physical space. And I'll give you an example. We recently did a experimental launch, which we also announced publicly, where you can take a picture of your room and then pick a furniture saying, I like mid-century furniture. So it'll pick furniture from our database or our set of available products and show how it actually fits into your room, and you can visualize your room. Right? And this is without any special gadgets. And imagine when we have special gadgets, what all can we do? Right? Now, compare that to a physical store where you can never get that experience. If you go to buy, you'll see a sofa and then you are like sort of doing a mental match to say, this is, I think, how it'll look like in my room, and somebody is measuring it out for you. But now, in an online world, you can actually create a more superior experience than a physical experience.
Wow.
Right? And the moment you do that, we believe a lot more people will then get convinced to move to the online world, because now they'll have a superior customer experience. And as gadgets start becoming more available, like, we have to see next year when Apple comes out with its, headset, how that transforms. If those transformations and technology starts to keep pace with it, 5 years, 10 years from now, you'll have a completely different user experience than you had. I mean, think about it. It was just 17 years ago that the first iPhone showed up.
Correct.
And can anybody imagine phones without a touchscreen today? Transformed. So imagine what next 10 years can hold in front of consumers in terms of the experiences that can be created.
Right. Sure. So when you look at, the domain that you're dealing with, I think the biggest piece that I love discussing about is supply chain, because somehow that has not been completely structured well. Of course, I'm talking more about the Indian ecosystem versus the US, right? So would you happen to talk about what from a supply chain has changed? Because you've been in the retail side, not just home, but also on the other side for a long period of time. How have you seen that evolve through technology?
Again, Wayfair doesn't operate in the Indian context, but I have reasonable amount of thought process on the Indian system, so let me talk about that a little bit. I think India is like one of the best places where supply chain transformation will happen in the next many years to come.
Okay.
Because we are probably the most complex country.
Correct.
In terms of everything that is there. We have rural areas, we have tier 3 to 1 cities, we have a fast evolving infrastructure that is coming through in the country. We have a very diverse and very different client customers that are spread across. And at the same time, we have a much more decentralized mechanism of suppliers as well. So I feel the next 5 to 10 years will be it's probably the best area to invest in. Right?
Sure.
I mean, and we know the past too. I mean, Flipkart, for example, fundamentally came into existence because of e-cart.
Correct.
Right? And they transformed how e-cart actually did delivery. And they are today one of the largest retailers, and fantastic innovation. But what holds true in the next 5 to 10 years is even bigger. And it's not just going to happen in the private space. Actually, it's going to happen, look at government, right? The amount of effort government is putting in, the entire Gati Shakti initiative that the government has is transforming infrastructure and logistics at the largest level.
Right.
Now, private players will now ride on top of it and build a mechanisms where you can bring not just the best suppliers from the remote corners of the country to the cities, but also take the fact that you can take best product selections from the cities and all the areas to the smallest part of the country.
Sure.
So I would say it's a heaven for anybody who wants to actually have a fantastic business sense in that area, because that transformation is unique. Now, we've learned a lot from the US and the West and other countries which have done that, but then we have our own mechanisms of how do you actually take that learning and adapt here. And I'm not, and we haven't even touched delivery yet, which is completely transformative in this space. So if you put it all together, you'll see in the next 5 to 10 years, probably some amazing startups come in and build fantastic amount of wealth because they would master this area.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. So when, I'm just going to go back to that first part where you said when there was this person who picked you for ads that you had never done, and you've generally picked things where you've not done. So how do you actually multiply that from a tech ecosystem standpoint? Because you're learning so many new things. But how do you put them to best use today? If you can.
I think there are two things that are very important for people to understand. Number one, if you want to be a great technologist, you should always keep pace with the changing tech, because tech transforms itself every few years. Right. Lot of the core fundamentals remain the same. So I always tell students when I go to universities, learn the basics. Core remains the same, but the technology evolves every 5 years. So you have to constantly keep pace with the latest tech.
Correct.
But then at the same time, don't be obsessed with the latest tech, because not everything fits into everything that is out there. So as a result of which, your choices of what you want to do should be informed with the space and the problem statement that you have, but the knowledge is important. So if I have to rate the importance of learning latest tech from a scale of 1 to 10, it should be always 10.
Correct.
Don't ever, otherwise you become a dinosaur and then you'll just die. Right? The most important aspect is you have to be 10 there, but don't be 10 and saying, oh, this is the latest tech, let me just apply that. Because there the choices have to be very dependent on the specific domain, specific problem statement that you're trying to solve. So when you do that, you're probably in the best place.
Sure. So I have another question that the team has also noticed that you have on your LinkedIn, which says, I feel mine has been a true tech love story. Yeah, I wanted to quote exactly what you had written. So tell us how this is. This sounds a little bit like, the Bollywood movies, but I really want to know, when you say this, what do you really mean? Because I did see the journey that you've gone through. So could you talk about why you feel that yours has been a true tech love story?
I think it's interesting. When I'll go back to my 10th grade. So in 10th grade, I had a tutor who was teaching me, helping me in mathematics. And I don't think I needed any help there. So we spent most of the time talking about his interest, which was electronics.
Right.
So he started building electronic circuits. He taught me how to build the first electronic circuit in those days. And I just fell in love with the whole aspect of building those circuits. And I used to stand in line in these, in one of the markets in Delhi, trying to buy smallest of components so I could build all of that stuff. And I loved that to death. And my project in my school was actually building some of these circuits.
Okay.
And then first time I saw a computer, I just naturally sort of fell in love with the computer. And I remember in college, and when I went to university in bachelor's, it was not very common to own computers. They were pretty expensive. And I remember saving a lot of money from my pocket money and made a first business case in front of my parents to say, this is how much I'll give, this is how much you give, and can we buy a computer?
Sure.
And that's how I ended up buying a computer. And then in college, I actually merged my two interests. And I built one of the first, what I believed was a card that goes into a computer. Nowadays, you don't see those, but those large computers where you build those cards. So I built that. and put some what we call static RAM into that and built what I believe must have been one of the first solid state disks, which ran so much faster than the floppies of those days. And it was just pure love for tech that I did that. And interestingly, I carried that card with me when I went to the US for higher studies.
Okay.
And I was in this running for a grant from my professor. And he had a couple of students he could give that grant to, and funding was very important. You come from a middle class family, you don't have all the money to pay for your master's. And he asked me, what did you do in university? So I said, instead of talking anything else, I luckily had that card and showed it to him. And he looked at it and said, you built it yourself? I said, yeah. And he tested me a little bit on it, and I got that grant.
Wow.
Right? And my relationship with that professor was so deep that was the first company I joined, his startup.
Okay.
I still am in touch with him. He was probably one of the most brilliant persons I've known in my life.
Right.
So imagine the theme that you start somewhere else and you end up in a place where you probably saw some really great tech and great stuff in your life and your career built out of that, totally unplanned.
Sure.
But because I loved what I did, I think I just naturally adapted to it.
Wow.
It was just fun. I never planned it. A lot of people plan their careers. I didn't. I just do what I love. And that's what it is.
Wow. So interesting, Rohit, on this one. So just wanted to check with you, what kind of a leader are you? Because I haven't worked with you, so I'm allowed to ask.
I don't know if you should ask me this question. You should ask people I have worked with.
But what's your style like? What do you generally like doing as a leader?
See, I would say 2 or 3 things are very critical in my style of working. Number one, I believe I can build and collect some of the best talent in the industry and bring them together.
Okay.
I always am a strong believer that everybody in your team should be smarter than you. So if you're not smarter than me, you can't work for me, right? Now it's a different task how I convince them to work for me because they have to work for a boss who's not as smart as them.
Sure.
But I think collecting the best talent and bringing people in who are really smarter than you is the best way, because that's your best way to learn as well.
Correct.
So a lot of people believe as leadership you should bring people where you are the smartest person in the room. I personally think they are the worst leaders because when you're the smartest person in the room, you're not growing anymore.
Correct.
So if you're not the smartest person in the room, you bring in the best talent and then you can grow. The second part, I think, is that you enable these leaders to perform. So a lot of leaders are micromanagers. They love, take my, authority. I have to approve before you do anything. I am the other way around.
Sure.
I believe that I enable once you hire great talent, you set them free, you let them learn, you let them actually lead, and contribute and help in the space in which you can help in.
Sure.
And I think that brings in a very, very strong element of being able to build a team that can really do wonders. And I think the third part that is very important for a leader is to understand the business context of what you're doing. I worked for a company, Yahoo, which is probably one of the best tech companies of its time. Probably had the best techies and probably the worst business sense. Because we were, falling 20% in a market that was growing 20%. You have to be a genius of a different kind to be able to do that. So very important to not just be great in technology, but learn it with the business sense that you're operating.
Sure.
So that becomes very critical. And the last part that I would say is that in any company you work for, make sure you understand the culture of that company. A lot of people came back and said, I come from XYZ, and this is what we used to do there. Great. But now you're not in that company, you're in a different company. So if you can learn and imbibe the culture of the company and combine that with the experience that you have to enhance that culture, you probably will end up being a great leader.
Wow. That's
some elements that I use.
Wow. Nice. Interesting. So what is the advice you have for engineers watching the show? Because these could be people who are applying for their first jobs or during this market turbulence, looking for a job. Yeah. So what is your advice for them?
I think one of the things that I said earlier is very important. When you're in university, make sure you understand and learn the basics. Like I said, I've always ran university programs, so I'll not name the university, but there was a very, very elite university I went and I was interviewing one of the students, and this person comes to me and says, "Oh, I'm this, I'm that," and everything. So,
Okay.
okay. I went back to some really basic computer science questions. And this person was like fish out of water,
Oh, Lord.
right?
Okay.
And I have solved this Google challenge, I have done this, and I've done. I'm like, you don't know what this means. And I think he was taken aback, right? And so was I. I didn't actually hire him. I actually didn't hire anybody. And when I went to the director of that university and gave feedback and said, you're not teaching computer science to these students. So what is happening is that in this, and I think all these Google challenges and coding challenges, I personally think have dumbed people down, as a result of which they're not understanding the basics.
Sure.
So when you are in university, understand the basics. Do not just focus on this shiny object that you can do that. And I think it's same for the companies, that they should not just lure people into these shiny objects. It's a both sides problem. So
Right.
understand and learn the basics when you're a student. When you go back to workplace, there is no better example than what the CEO of Walmart, Doug McMillan, once said in All Hands. And it is, I put it on my profile as well. He was holding this All Hands, and there's this intern who raised his hand and said, how can I be in your place one day? And, hats off to the person for asking that question. And Doug, being the great leader that he is, who actually rose as an intern in Walmart and eventually became the CEO of the Fortune 1
Right.
company, said, 3 things are the only things that I have followed in my career. Number 1, no matter what job is given to you, do a great job. Right? Some people say, if you give me a complex problem, I'll do a great job. This job is below my dignity.
Right.
No, whatever is given to you, do a great job. Number 2, always do more than what is given to you.
Correct.
So don't just do enough and get by, because that's kind of how everybody is looking around you and saying, I can give you no responsibility. Number 3, don't be this lone warrior. So I'm the smartest guy,
Yeah, sure.
I can do everything. Always work as a team, because that multiplies your effect. And he said, these are the only 3 things I followed in my life and I reached here.
Wow.
So I would advise everybody that, and I keep repeating it like, they say, repetition doesn't ruin a prayer. CEO of Intuit used to say that, and I always remember it. Just keep doing that.
Wow. Wow. I'll keep that in mind, Rohit. Those were like really wise words, and I'll keep that in mind. Before we end the show, do you have any few words to say, anything that you want to share with the audience? Please feel free to.
I think the most important part I would share is that we are in a very transformative world, right? The number of opportunities around you are immense. Just have the strength to go and grab them,
Right.
And don't just blindly follow established norms, because people who do that do not transform. People who understand those norms and then have the strength in them to actually challenge them and change them are the ones who are going to essentially take the world by the storm, right? And you don't have to be in a startup or a founder to do that. You can do it in any place you're in, right? You can be in the in the biggest company possible and still transform, and you can be in a startup and still be a really boring person who doesn't do any change, right? So please look at opportunities and keep your eyes and ears open around what is happening, and the world is not going to look the same as it is today, 5 years from now and 10 years from now, and history shows us that. So have that energy in you to be able to do that.
Wow.
That's what I
I
would
don't know
advise.
about anybody else, but I'm superbly feeling the energy in the room. And I'm sure that your team is as enthusiastic as you are. You do rub off that energy to other people. So I'm sure they're also very excited to solve all the problems, whether they are complex or simple, with you, Rohit. So
Try that. That's how we are building great companies.
I'm sure. Thank you so much for being on our show. It was really, really, really a pleasure to have you on our show. I really enjoyed this conversation thoroughly. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was lovely to be here.